Okay, that's great. Well, you're not done with me yet. But fortunately, when my friends at SGTech asked me to come and speak to the forum, I kind of said I did what, the classic consultant move, which is I'll say yes, but then I'll figure out how to get somebody else to speak. And the somebody else actually knows something about it. And then I realized I know not just one somebody else, I know at least two somebody else's who will fill out the entire space. Now, this is a real privilege for many reasons because Piyush and Ajay are old friends, and I think I wouldn't trust these guys with a lot of things, but I definitely trust them on the topic of digital trust. And I think you can all appreciate why. So we could have a conversation about a whole bunch of other things, and maybe we'll just do that, if we run out of things to talk about. But let me get the conversation going. Piyush, DBS. I'm a visitor to Singapore, but I just can't get away from the DBS brand being everywhere. So clearly it is a trusted brand. And I don't think you need to kind of spell it out that it is a trusted brand, but I'd just like to understand what digital trust means to you and to everybody at DBS, and how does that manifest in your brand and in your competitive advantage?
That's a lot of questions. So first, let me start with a confession. I've known this guy for 50 years. And if he says he can't trust me, I can tell you I don't trust him even that much. The second, I think ubiquity of brand is not directly correlated to trust in the brand. There are a lot of brands which are global, but there are a lot of question marks about whether people trust them or not. So the fact you see DBS everywhere is not necessarily the best gauge. But I think the truth is DBS is well regarded. On the Edelman Trust Index, we stand apart because we're seen as the people's bank. And there's an underlying thing to that, which I think is an important element of trust, whether in the digital or real space, which is a sense of purpose. Are you genuine about what you're trying to do? I think that makes a big difference. However, if we just dive deeper into digital trust, as I was told this morning the trust report has got some 11 attributes, but in the car driving here, I came up with half a dozen. So let me rattle through some of the things that we think about when we're thinking about the trust paradigm. The first thing we think about in a digital context, the first is just you've got to be reliable in your offerings, and you've got to have a really great customer experience. That matters. We saw in the last week, now WhatsApp was down for a few hours yesterday, and the papers this morning had a list of 6 other applications you should put along with WhatsApp because you can't rely or trust on WhatsApp. Kakao had a fire and was shut down for 4 days last week, and the whole slew of articles in the next week saying you can't rely too much on Kakao. So reliability matters, but so does customer experience. The simpler you make it, the more people trust you. So we spend a lot of time. We have a team of like a dozen ethnographers constantly thinking about this customer experience. We can talk about it. The second thing which I think Bhaskar you talked about is authenticity. I think within this world of fake news and misinformation, that's a huge one. A friend came and told me the other day that they'd bought some Doge coin or something because I was, busy espousing the purchase of Doge coin. I said, really? I was espousing this? Turns out there's a deep fake of my, face somewhere rattling off saying it's a good investment to make. Now we have a whole team constantly looking for this and pulling it down. We can talk about that too. But authenticity is important in engendering an environment of trust. I think you talked about the other two. Security is a big deal. Certainly in banking, most banks work at it very hard. But it's not just security at the periphery. It's not just firewalls and end-user devices and intermediary platforms. It is actually recognizing that people expect us to try and figure out, even at every level, is this something you're likely to do? How do I secure against that? So we use a lot of AI at the back. Privacy is a big one. Earlier at breakfast we were talking, and I made the point though that you talked about it yourself. The problem with privacy is it is not an absolute. It is very relative. How people feel about privacy in, you said, Korea or Germany or US or Singapore is very, very different. But it's also very different by age groups. How older people feel about it, younger people feel about it, how you feel about it in the morning versus how you feel about it in the evening, depending on the trade-off. But you've got to think about it constantly, because at the end of the day, people want to be private in many ways. Appropriateness we think about a lot, particularly in the context of use of data and in the context of AI models. We use about 500 models in the company today. It's going to be 5,000 in a few years. These models are making decisions on everything, on credit, on marketing, on compliance, on audit, on HR, on hiring, on finance. The suitability of the models, the appropriateness of the model use, are we using data we're supposed to be using? Would I be comfortable if the use of this data showed up on the newspapers? We think a lot about that. And accountability. Accountability to me is elements of your thing, transparency. But it is also a fairness. If things go wrong, and things will go wrong, how do you deal with that? There's a big debate right now on apportionment of blame if a consumer gets phished. You've got to think very hard about what is the right way to deal about it, because all of these add together to create the environment of trust. But finally, Bhaskar, to me, it's not just us. There's a bigger question, and that's institutional arrangements. So to me, when you go to a hospital and a doctor treats you, you assume the doctor is good, and you don't go and check the medical certificate and the track record, because the institutional arrangements give you confidence that the hospital exists, has been regulated, has got a license, people have hired somebody. That creates trust. Those institutional arrangements are equally important in the digital world. So what is the rule of law? What is the prosecution for white-collar crime? Can you go to the police and will the police react if something goes wrong? Those kinds of institutional arrangements are critical. And by the way, that's one of the things that makes Singapore stand out. We have a couple of opportunities and products that we've launched together in industry in Singapore, but they're basically based on the belief that Singapore stands for trust because of institutional arrangements. And if we can leverage those institutional arrangements, then maybe we can create a distinctive product capability. But those are equally important. So, sorry, long answer, but many dimensions, as you said.
No, that's fantastic. That's fantastic. So this is really helpful. So thinking about how many of the attributes we've been talking about, plays out in the context of DBS. Ajay, the same question to you, but going back to this notion of trust as a lubricant, as friction-free environment, one of the things that I know that MasterCard works very hard at is almost doing something contradictory, which is engendering trust and taking friction away, even though every time we make financial transactions, the companies introduce friction by saying two-factor authentication, enter a password, do this, do that. I know that that's an issue that plays a big role in how you think about trust at MasterCard. So I'd love to get your thoughts on that.
So first of all, I lived in Singapore for 14 years before I moved to London about 12 years back. And it's really good to be back. And I always call Singapore a very trusted place. As I describe it, because many people ask me, how was your experience living in Singapore? So it's interesting. That's what we are discussing about. I consider Singapore a very trusted city, trusted country. So coming back to your question, Bhaskar, I think the first key thing is trust is critical for any business. Like none of us will do any business if we don't trust the other party. And then as you look at the digital world, digital trust is at the heart of a digital economy. That's actually really the thing which powers it. If you look at the physical world, you can actually see someone physically, you can look at the device, you can look at the card or whatever they have. So you have a medium of exchange and with which you trust. In the digital world, on the other hand, you don't see the person on the other side. So you need a lot of technology, a lot of solutions, a lot of other things which need to be at play to trust the other side. And that's why it becomes really important. And if you look in the digital world, the way the world is evolving, the kind of hyper-connectivity that we have, the billions of devices that we have, and the mega data that we have, you combine all that, you actually have an even bigger challenge in the market. And then you look at even further ahead in the future, where the way commerce is evolving with machines, your driverless car in the future could be paying a toll, on the road. Your refrigerator is probably ordering groceries. Your printer is ordering ink. And a lot of these things now sound very visionary, but look, the technology exists. It's happening, and I think it's going to happen more and more. And with that kind of world, digital trust becomes even more important. And so for us, our mission has been to really look at the digital economy and look at it in a way a local economy exists. So, when you live in a particular area, your local area, you shop, you're comfortable, you're safe, you're secure, you have a peace of mind. And the idea for us is to be able to create a digital economy which actually works like your local economy. That's the idea. And you got to remember, trust is a very fragile thing too. Like Piyush was, talking about trust earlier. It's very hard to create. Being visible as a brand, like he said, does not mean that you're going to be trusted. So it takes a long time for companies like us, who, we are one of the most trusted brands in the world, to create that trust. And it means investing in technology, infrastructure. And coming to your question, that's why, the infrastructure that you create, the tools that you create, the solutions that you create, so that they work like a ecosystem that creates trust. And that's what is key, and that's what we work on.
So, Bhaskar, your question was rooted in assumption that if you're frictionless, you get more trust. And by the way, to a large extent, I agree with that. Yeah. Right? Because when I talk about the reliability and the customer experience paradigm, that's true. The simpler you make it, the better you are. Yeah. But it's so ironic that sometimes it gets too frictionless, right? And that causes distrust. So I'll give you an example. So for most of our applications, we used to have a digital token, right? The problem with the digital token, it's a hard token. You got to carry it around. You got to remember to use it. The battery runs out. You got to replace it. So it created a lot of customer inconvenience. And people would say, I can't really trust myself to do digital banking the whole time because I might not have my token. So to solve for that, we moved to a dynamic soft token in the background. You don't need the hard token. Now, problem. When you use the dynamic soft token, guess what? The consumer doesn't see anything. They're sort of going and entering and they say, oh my God, I didn't type in a password. The bank didn't ask me for anything. I didn't go to my key. And so I started getting worried. So we introduced friction. And the friction is we now produce a little circle which goes round and round over there and says confirming verification. Actually, it means nothing. But we did that just because the consumer wanted to know something is happening in the background. And we produce a friction. So I'll give you another example of creating friction. We have an application here called Bhalla, where you can instantly transfer money to anybody, etc. And so when you sort of type in Bhaskar's phone number and you press $40, it's gone. And then again, we realized people were worried, did the money actually go? So my ethnography team came up with this thing. We show a small paper plane flying from the left of the screen to the right of the screen. And that gives you confidence and trust that the money has gone from here and gone there. So you've got to think very hard about how does the consumer mind work? And this consumer mind work, what is going to give you reassurance, right? And sometimes reassurance comes from friction as opposed to frictionless.
I think that's a great point, right? And of course, each one of us haven't really evolved that much further from the Neanderthals, and essentially our human concerns are pretty much the same as it's been over millennia. And let me just sort of pick up on that last point. Ajay, I did a small shout out to pay with a smile notion. That seems like I just with Piyush's observations, people would feel very uncomfortable just smiling and walking out of the store. And so have you experienced that with your own ethnographic and anthropological teams?
So look, from our perspective, we really look at what the consumer wants. And that's what we invest heavily in researching. What is the consumer thinking? What do they want? And my experience has been that ultimately what you provide to the consumer tests out. Because, big brands like us, companies like us have existed for decades. We're not here for, months or years. And if you provide an end-to-end system, which actually assures a consumer that if I've done a transaction with a MasterCard, it's reliable, it's trustworthy, it's safe. And if I have a problem, I have a dispute resolution mechanism too. That is what creates trust in my view. And again, coming to your question, I think the way it plays out is in the biometric space. We were the pioneers in bringing biometrics to payments, pay by face, pay by fingerprint. And we found consumers overwhelmingly like it. And to Piyush's earlier point, I think historically the world of security has been the biggest problem for security. Because we just add and make it so complicated that consumers don't embrace it. So there is a middle ground where we found that with biometrics, consumers love it. They like the experience. It's friction-free. But it has to be done with with proper processes, with correct quality, correct privacy controls, and consent. And the biometric checkout program which you're talking of is a program we launched earlier this year. We are piloting it in Brazil. But really, it basically is bringing biometrics which you do on your mobile phone to physical stores. So you shop for your groceries, you walk out of the store, and basically you can wave or you can pay with your smile. And we've got a outstanding response in Brazil, and we've got a program now planned to be rolled out in several countries around the world. So I think there is a balance. I think the key is that the consumers need to know that you are a company they can trust, and that you will create all processes around to make sure that it's safe, secure, and then they can have their own peace of mind. And I think things which Piyush mentioned, of course, they help because it reinforces that confidence.
So I was going to say, some of these evolution. So I went to one of these stores. I didn't know about trust. I walked out of the store and I was paranoid the alarms are going to go off because I hadn't done anything. So I think it gets time to get used to. 20 years ago when I was sitting over here, we launched this first pay with your thumbprint. I had a very little usage. And when I went and probed, people were quite uncomfortable. In fact, some people told me, I'm really worried somebody will chop off my thumb and go and use the thumb to make payments. But today, people have got used to it. So I think some of these human behavior changes just happen through the evolution of time.
Yeah. So I think, we have certainly seen evolution of time, and then the massive, what I call the digital shock that we've all experienced over the last 3 years. It's kind of like this societal science experiment that changed our behaviors almost overnight, right? Parts of the world that, were primarily cash using, had no option. So let's just go to digital wallets, digital payments, and all kinds of other behavior changes just happened. And we're now going through the next phase, which is the aftershock, and trying to figure out, what's the so-called new normal going to look like, and we're not there yet. So let me pivot this. I know that I've been talking about the importance of considering the human being behind all this, human behavior, the ethnographic and the anthropological aspects of this, and I do that particularly because I'm conscious of the fact that I'm in a room full of technologists. But let me pivot this back to technology, because I'm sure you're dying to hear about, what are some of the exciting things on the horizon. So what I'm going to ask the two of you is one technology, or one technology suite, as it were, that you think is most exciting. And it may be the same one or a different one that would keep you up at night, that you're really worried about. It could actually create more risk in terms of trust. And Piyush, the same question to you. Ajay, go ahead.
So I think, look, technology can change life. And I think the best example the world saw was in the last 2 years, when COVID just completely stopped the world. And then vaccines came as a miracle. And in 2 years, we can all, start meeting each other. So I think we saw the best example. And if you look at our payments world and the financial services world, I'd say there are 3 technologies which I see which are complementary to each other, which I think are changing the world and will change the world in a big way in the future. AI, I think, is very big, and we are seeing the use of AI for disease control. We are seeing it for managing food distribution. We are seeing it for weather prediction. And even for us as MasterCard, we use AI in a very big way. And we've seen the scoring systems and the fraud control systems and the anti-hacking technologies save $30 billion for our constituents in the last 2 years. That's a big save. And that technology, I think, is now becoming more and more powerful with the kind of data that we are seeing and the processing power that we have and the hyper-connectivity that we have. So I think that's going to go a long way. I think add to that what we are seeing in the quantum space. Now, quantum has been around for a long time, but it's now started becoming real. And with the power of quantum, AI and the computing power can again go by leaps and bounds. And that again will help in a big way. In fact, we recently announced new specifications for our own cards, which creates these quantum resistant cards, so that when quantum computers actually come in the world, your cards and your digital technologies are safe. In fact, we unveiled the physical cards last week. So quantum, I think, can make a big difference. And I think the third big piece is tied to the whole discussion, which is digital identity. I think digital identity has a long way to go. I think we are scratching the surface. I think the world has made a lot of progress, but visualize a future world, as I was talking earlier. And I think all these technologies combined together with the identity and the identity of machines, the identity of devices, I think can make a big difference to our own experience and our lives.
Speaking of our lives, which of these or some other actually do you think carries the greatest risk in potentially going the wrong direction?
So here is the answer. I think the cost is all three. So frankly, on AI, we are already seeing that AI is being used in a very big way to create cyber attacks. So in fact, you almost have to use, every time you do something, you actually use AI to preempt and say, okay, this is the way fraudsters are going to attack. Same with quantum. In fact, that is the biggest worry of the world, that when quantum computers come in, you will be able to break the traditional encryptions very easily. And same with digital identity. I think, that is the key of the cyberspace, that you're going to be innovating and thinking ahead as to what are the fraudsters going to do. So all these three technologies can actually help the world, but we have to also watch out because it can also harm.
Yeah, knife has two sides. So,
Yes.
Piyush, same question.
A little to add. I think we are already using AI for authentication. It's to triangulate and let AI triangulate and figure you are you is actually very helpful. The problem, as Ajay correctly pointed out, is the technology is freely available. So if I can do it to identify you, you can also use it. It's like spy versus spy. You can use the same technology to fake you are you. So two sides of the a knife. That's a problem. But I think AI is big. I also think blockchain. So I extend the digital identity question a little bit bigger. I think today most of trust and tech, if you look historically, is based on a hub and spoke arrangement. Most of modern day commerce and interaction. Everybody knows how much money you have because the bank tells you. And I know how much money I have because the central bank tells me. And we all know who owns the house because the Registrar of Society keeps a record of who owns the house. But the truth is these hub and spoke arrangements are subject to a lot of misuse. You can, in many societies, people go and change and fudge the records at the registrar. I think a distributed ledger technology and blockchain is a game changer because that really makes broad participation and changes the nature of authentication. I think it's going to change the back office of the world. And that will address many of the questions you raise about are you who you are, did you do what you said, did the transaction actually happen, did ownership actually pass, and it will be reflected on a commonly shared ledger by everybody. But is that subject to risk? Of course it is. Already people are moving from a proof of stake to a proof of ownership model on blockchain. They're doing it to try and reduce the consume power as well as to make it more easy. But at some stage, can you work out a situation where somebody can overwhelm the ownership of a private chain and public chain? It's not impossible to envisage the scenarios. So I think the technologies, to me, AI and blockchain are massive, but I think each of them comes with risk. There is no guarantee that the technology is going to be foolproof. It can be misused.
Great. So looks like we have a big cupboard full of technologies and ideas and problems to solve. Now, ultimately, these technologies and problems need to be connected by the creative folks, the innovators. And just having the technology is not enough. We need to harness it for use. So that brings me to my next question, and that has to do with innovation. Particularly in large established organizations like DBS and MasterCard. One normally associates in the technology space innovation with, essentially the unwashed, sitting in a messy room in a garage or a dorm room, coming up with a great idea. And quite often it's, leaders of big organizations like you that spend sleepless nights trying to figure out, is there somebody, going to come and disrupt my business? So I'm curious about how you think about innovation, particularly in the areas of building digital trust, because ultimately a large part of your business is about that. How do you organize that within your company? Is it inside? Is it outside? Is it a mix? Just help us think about, provide some transparency. Maybe it starts with Piyush first.
Yeah, I guess first let me give 2 minutes on we've tried to industrialize innovation, like, 3M, one of these companies. It's taken some time. But we try to innovate in a very structured kind of thinking process. We've got 4 levels to our innovation pyramid. At the top of the house, we get together as a, team every 6 months. We have some 20, 30 people. And we have people read about what's happening around the world, what's happening in biometrics, what's happening with, NLP, etc. And we spend the day kicking those around and saying, hey, how could we use this to change banking offerings, right? And so every 6 months, we pick up 1 or 2 of these that we think we're going to drive. In some cases, this is architected around changes in security or in privacy. And we say, okay, you know what? If we could take this, we could create a capability around it that would be different or take it to the market. The second level, we've actually got our entire tech universe is broken up into about 30 platforms. So for example, payments is a platform. But the business leadership and the tech leadership manage it together. We have something called 2 in a box. So it's not led by business or tech. And each of the platforms is charged to think of a horizon 3 or 5 years out. And their job is to try and figure what could this platform look in 5 years. So what's happening around the world, what's technology doing, and how could we reimagine a 5-year view? And that, again, has elements of the security piece to it. So some of the innovation comes from the platform model. We've, as a company, gone from managing through vertical silos now to increasingly managing through journeys, horizontals. And so we, run about 200 journeys across the company. And each squad or journey group is constantly looking at how do they drive innovation into that journey. So that's the third level. And then, like many other people, we crowdsource. So we have entrepreneurship agendas. We crowdsource from people at the bottom. Now, many of the innovations that come to the process don't tend to be architected around trust and security. But because of the industry we're in, the nature of a bank, it so happens that many of the innovations do architect around it. One of the things that we stand for is trust. So a lot of the innovation comes from that. So let me give you an example to make it more vivid. As the crypto boom was taking place, and all of these big exchanges were doing well, Binance and CoinHako or Coinbase. Our team spent a lot of time thinking about, how could we innovate in the space and be relevant in the space. And we sit back, the obvious answer to that is all of this is Wild West. The people operating in this space are unregulated, they're wild, people don't trust them. Every exchange gets hacked every 3 months, started with Mt. Gox some years ago. So if we had to differentiate in this space, the right way or one logical way for us to differentiate was to be able to create a more trusted product. We are a regulated industry, we have a fantastic regulator, so if you could put our product within the realms of being more trusted, we could differentiate from everybody else. Now, so we created a crypto exchange, and it has the whole shebang. We allow a tokenizing platform, a listing platform, a trading platform, a digital custody platform. But in doing that, our focus was how do we leverage the regulatory cover we get from the authorities, the institutional arrangements. How do we say that when you custodize and digital custody is different from custodizing with an exchange? How do we create a hot and cold wallet and encryption keys which can then reflect that reality? That we are a little bit different from a normal exchange. And so that's what we were able to architect, a digital custody which we say is bank standard custody. And then as a proof of point, we actually went and offered that service not to consumers first, but to exchanges. And so when exchanges start using us for digital custody, that's proof of point. They think our custody is more secure than their own custody. Now that's an example of how you actually take an innovation idea, leverage a trust platform, and then make that the basis of a competitive difference.
Yeah, that's great. That's great examples. Thank you for opening the window into your highly proprietary innovation box here. Ajay, how do you guys do this?
So look, from our perspective, innovation is key to our business, and especially the area we are in, which is cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, and all these technologies. There is innovation happening pretty much on a weekly basis. So the way we look at it is to look at it from an organic perspective, inorganic perspective, and partnerships. And so where we have core competencies as an organization, where we've built a lot of muscle, we use our organic skills. So for example, the biometric checkout program has been developed internally by us. The quantum program, which I just described earlier, has been developed internally by us.
When you say internally, is it an acquired group or your internal?
No, it's our internal teams. And then I'm coming to the acquisition bit. So we then invest very heavily in acquisitions to acquire capabilities. So for example, Piyush was talking about blockchain and the whole crypto ecosystem. Now, we all realize that the crypto ecosystem has become a big part of the whole overall financial ecosystem. But there is a need of trust in that space. So we recently announced a program called Crypto Secure, which is based off an acquisition that we did of a company called CipherTrace, which basically creates crypto intelligence for the financial services industry. So anytime a consumer is doing a crypto transaction, it can look at the patterns of the transaction, it can look at which is the exchange which it's coming from, what is the behavior of the transaction, what kind of device is being done on. And to Piyush's earlier point, so like it's connected and scoring 2,400 exchanges. And some of these exchanges are not reliable, but some of them are. And so to create that entire intelligence around it, to look at all the regulatory framework, to look at the KYC, add identity to it, and that solution is bringing trust to the whole crypto ecosystem. We did the same with artificial intelligence. Brightoneer is a company we acquired. It's a company based in San Francisco, purely for risk management solutions, because it's got some very specialized AI technology for detecting fraud and cyber breaches. We acquired a company called Ekata, which does identity. Then we acquired a company called New Data, which looks at devices and the device behavior, and how you hold your device tells us whether you are actually the consumer using the device or not. These were all capabilities that we acquired. We acquired like 6 companies in the last few years in the cyberspace. And finally,
it must be a pretty messy organizational challenge, isn't it? Normally bringing in that many acquisitions.
Not really, actually, because these are complementary technology. Because ultimately, you have to realize all these technologies have to finally deliver to a consumer, and you need all these technologies. So one will not do it, and that's actually what gives us competitive advantage as a company. Because there are very few companies in the world which can package all these things and can bring all this firepower together to create a safe and secure ecosystem. And so actually it's worked very, very well for us. And lastly is partnering. So we, for example, last week announced a partnership with Paxos, which will bring the convenience of being able to trade and for custody of crypto through banks. And we will now announce a pilot program for that.
That's great. So this is I play an academic these days, and what's running through my mind is some fantastic case studies, because the two of you offered us 2 very different vignettes as to how you organize innovation in your companies. And so you can begin to see a book coming out of all this. But let's kind of get beyond what seems like a fascinating clinical exploration. And let's get personal. You're both leaders of your individual organizations and leaders of trust in the organization. What's your personal stamp on this? I mean, how do you see your role, and how do you kind of play the master orchestrator? Is there any advice you want to offer everybody in this room on that? Who would like to go first?
Ajay is a master orchestrator. Let him try.
So look, so from my perspective,
I learned from Bhaskar very quickly.
You can see how he orchestrated this right here.
So look, I am a consumer champion, and whatever I think of, do, and organize, and all the stuff that I've described is from a consumer perspective. Because I think of myself as a consumer. I think of my family as a consumer. I think of my friends as consumers. I think of all of you as consumers. And if we put that lens, I think you will create the best solution, because you will bring trust in it. You will bring a mechanism. If there is a trust that is broken, you'll bring a dispute resolution mechanism, and you'll bring peace of mind, because that is what we all want as consumers. It pains me when I see breaches. It pains me when I see hacks. It pains me when I see, certain segments of the society compromised because of all these malware attacks. And I think, there is a fairness our industry can bring, to society by making sure that we provide the tools and the technologies and the solutions. So as the world evolves as a digital economy, we also evolve as a fairer society?
So, I think most leaders, Bhaskar, well, there's some elements to the job. You have set up strategy. You try to focus on creating a culture that works. And by and large, you want to create a culture where you don't have to sort of top-down drive everything. But a large part of what you do is look at allocation of resources. And there's not just allocation of capital, but allocation of management resource. Where do people need to spend their time? And as a leader, that's a large part of what I do. Try to figure and set up priorities for the company and the organization to set up time. And some of it is done just by, the normal financial process. You set up budgets for people. But some of it is done by your own signaling. So in the last few years, there are two committees that I set up, which I chair, which are unusual. You never had that 10 years ago. Today you do. So one's called a Fair Dealing Committee, and I chair that. And it's unusual in banks because we have a lot of other committees to chair. But I chair the Fair Dealing Committee because this idea about making sure that everything we do is seen to be fair by the consumer, I think that's really critical. And the reality is that often in the course of our work, people have different kinds of priorities. You need to make a budget, you need to create a product, you need to get a product out. To be the customer spokesperson and keep thinking about, are we dealing fairly on the issue, it requires a different muscle. I chair the committee particularly because I think that muscle still needs to be built. Another committee I created, which again I chair, is this committee on appropriate use of data. I think as you go forward, data is the new, not just the new oil, it's the new air. But use of data is going to be the biggest hotspot in the next decade, whether it's for models, AI, privacy, security, everything borders around data. So we created this committee for responsible use of data. We came up with a framework which we call PURE, P-U-R-E. It's a data must be purposeful, it must be unsurprising, it must be respectful, and it must be explainable. Every model we create in the bank, every user data, well, not every, a lot of it is business as usual, but anything which is new and material comes up to that committee, and we debate relentlessly about it, saying, is this the right thing to do? Now, both of these committees have a life, and they create energy around the organization because I spend personal time to chair them. So as a CEO, you need to do that, do all the usual stuff, but when you want to create OB markers or create line of sight or line of direction, you can only do that by signaling from the top of the house.
So a common theme that I'm picking up across both your observations is you are at the top of the house, but you don't seem to forget, when you come down from the top, go out the front door, you're just like everybody else out in the street. So you are a user, a consumer. And taking the consumer's point of view and where the pain points are and where it's a hassle and how they would much rather have convenience rather than go through a series of steps to get to the ideal point and so on. So putting the human being at the center of this, whether it's the appropriateness point, Piyush, that you were talking about, or the kind of the frictionless approach to payments and retail that Ajay you were talking about. So reminding ourselves of the centeredness around the human, who ultimately is the user of all this. Is really. So.
But Bhaskar, the key thing, remember, let's start with this. You talked about it. This is easy and it's not easy. And it's not easy because what the consumer or the human or you and I want is contextual.
Yeah.
And because it varies by I want a completely friction-free experience, except that I get scammed. And then I come to the company and say, hey, you know what? Why didn't you put some friction in this because I got scammed? So it depends on your context. Do you want to have friction or you not want to have friction, right? We were talking over dinner yesterday. Today, payments in a bank go instantly. You just put a message in your phone device, it comes to my computer system, in real time it goes, it leaves the bank, disappears, right? But if you got scammed, you really come back and say, hey, why did it go instantly? Couldn't you have waited half an hour? Or couldn't you have waited 12 hours? So what we've done in Singapore, as people know, after the scams and the OCBC issue, we have deliberately created a 12-hour friction process for some things, which means even though it can go completely frictionless, we don't do it, and we give it a 12-hour window just in case. Now, a lot of people complain. They say, you know what, why does it take 12 hours to do this? And that's because you as a consumer don't know what you want. Sometimes you want it frictionless and sometimes you want friction. So it's not that easy.
Yeah, so I think we have run out of time because I'm looking at the number 0.00 right here. So that suggests that we're going to be in trouble. So we have a lightning round here, lightning round. So you guys have to think and talk very fast. There's a great interest in thinking about Singapore. Mentioned Singapore and concerns about scams and so on. But Singapore is also a natural place to have this discussion about digital trust. Your quick observations. You guys are veterans and experts of Singapore. I'm just a visitor. So your quick observations. How realistic is it for Singapore to be, kind of a capital of digital trust?
200%. I think, I was on the Emerging Stronger Task Force. We put together government level to look at Singapore's future in a post-COVID world. And we talked about basic sustainability and digitization. But at the heart of digitization is a capacity to be a center of trust.
Ajay?
Oh, absolutely, 100%. Because it's very digital and it's a very trustworthy country. So, absolutely.
God, end with agreement. Well, what a disappointment, but thank you so much.